Research team has successfully located the wreckage of the USS Juneau in the South Pacific.
The first signal from the drone came back as a faint vibration along the cable, a tremor that ran through the control station as if the machine itself were shivering at what it had just crossed into. Beneath nearly 3 miles of cold Pacific water, the hull of the USS Juneau appeared through drifting curtains of silt like a sudden apparition. The wreck had been found years earlier, but no vessel or probe had ever truly entered its interior. This time was different. This drone was built to navigate enclosed, collapsed, low-light structures with a precision more like a cautious animal than a machine. What it would find inside the shattered cruiser was expected to be fragments, rust, and silence. No one imagined anything more, yet the first images flickered across the monitors with a strange sense of expectancy, as though the Juneau itself had waited decades for someone to finally come inside. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The outer hull looked like frozen smoke, metal edges softened by rust blooms and swaths of deep-sea organisms. The torpedo blast that had ripped the ship apart in 1942 still scarred the structure, with torn steel curled outward like petals of a dark flower. As the drone glided forward, its lights pushed back a darkness untouched for more than 80 years. The silt shifted upward in little storms, spiraling around the drone's floodlights. At first, nothing appeared out of the ordinary, nothing more than what any wreck of that age would show: collapsed decks, twisted beams, cables drifting like kelp. But as the drone eased toward the interior breach, the atmosphere seemed to change. The debris inside the opening was strangely arranged, as if something had disturbed it long after the ship had settled on the seafloor. When the drone crossed the threshold into the interior, the scene stabilized into clarity. The camera showed the remains of a corridor that should have collapsed entirely. Instead, portions of the floor were oddly intact. Bulkheads that ought to have folded inward had settled in a stable position, almost like an archway. This alone suggested that the forces acting on the ship during its sinking might have been misunderstood. The interior damage pattern hinted at an implosion far more complex than the initial assessments had ever suggested. A vibration rippled through the control team as they exchanged glances, recognizing implications about the final moments of the ship that no historian had previously documented. Farther in, the drone maneuvered through a once narrow hallway where lockers had folded outward from the walls. Their metallic frames now resembled open jaws. Something about the way they had warped told a story of immense pressure, yet also of uneven distribution, almost as if pockets of air had resisted collapse for much longer than expected. The researchers had assumed Juneau had been instantly torn apart, leaving no enclosed spaces. The drone's discovery disturbed that assumption. What it found suggested that some compartments may have remained sealed, at least briefly, before the ocean claimed them. This raised questions about the final seconds for those aboard, a subject that had long been debated with limited physical evidence. Now the drone transmitted clues in real time, illuminating patterns once hidden in darkness. The machine descended a debris slope where remnants of bunks lay in twisted layers. The identification plaques were still faintly visible beneath rust. The paint, remarkably, clung stubbornly to fragments of the metal surfaces. Certain items, ration tins, a collapsed footlocker, and something that looked like a personal cup flattened by pressure, rested where they had settled as if time had pressed pause. It was not the existence of these objects that unsettled the observers, but their arrangement. They had not scattered randomly. Instead, several distinct groupings appeared as though currents or some unknown force had repositioned them into clusters. This contradicted models predicting chaotic dispersal during descent. It hinted that the ship had not tumbled freely as it sank, but may have rotated or pivoted in a controlled fashion dictated by the internal destruction pattern. The drone pressed deeper toward a partially intact mess compartment. Its interior was a ghostly theater, frozen mid-motion. Chairs were bent around a central support beam, some stacked atop one another. Dishes, still recognizable though coated in sediment, lay on the floor in deliberate arcs. The shapes of overturned tables suggested that, at the moment of impact and flooding, the ship had twisted in a way that forced everything to slide to one side before the deck fractured. This confirmed a theory long debated by naval engineers studying wartime sinkings. that under certain shock load conditions, internal geometry could create temporary pivot points, affecting how the vessel broke apart. For decades, such theories had hovered in uncertainty. Now, the Juneau's interior provided visual confirmation. The deeper the drone traveled, the more it became clear that the wreck was not simply a collapsed shell, but a living archive of forces that had not been fully understood until now. The corridor leading to the forward storage spaces had buckled in a manner that showed sequential failure, not instantaneous collapse. Even the direction of the folds in the steel told a story. They suggested that the torpedo blast did not rupture the hull uniformly, which had implications for analyzing similar wartime losses. Engineers watching the feed began scribbling notes, recalculating pressure dynamics, adjusting long-held models of underwater shock waves interacting with ship architecture. But the most startling discovery came when the drone approached what remained of an internal bulkhead near the midsection. A small, open compartment lay on the other side, the floor of which was surprisingly flat. At first, the camera struggled to focus, dust particles drifting like flakes of ash. Then the outlines became clear. On the floor lay a collection of items that had survived in improbable condition. Paper, or at least the remnants of it, lay fused in a stack. The drone hovered silently above it, stabilizers adjusting with delicate pulses. The stack was not recognizable as a document in any readable sense, but its presence was startling. Organic material rarely survived at such depths, let alone after violent destruction. The fact that these remnants had endured meant the compartment must have collapsed in a way that prevented exposure to the full brunt of water flow. This single discovery promised to reshape the understanding of what kinds of artifacts could survive inside deep-sea wrecks. A metallic object lay beside the fused papers. It was not uniform like a tool and not familiar in shape. The drone's light refracted off its curved surface, revealing ridges that resembled hand engraving. The design was faint but unmistakably intentional. This item prompted the control team to freeze the drone, allowing the cameras to focus. No catalog of the ship's inventory had listed anything similar. It appeared to be personal, perhaps carried by one of the sailors. The engravings bore symmetrical patterns, too deliberate to be random corrosion. If recovered, this object could provide insight not only into personal belongings on board, but into the cultural traces carried into war by individuals now long gone. The mere presence of something so delicate preserved in that chamber suggested a pocket of stillness during the ship's catastrophic breakup. As the drone maneuvered through the compartment, something else caught the camera's attention near the base of the bulkhead. The wall displayed fractures, but along one section, a smooth channel ran downward, almost like a groove cut by steady water flow. Except the pattern was too even, too clean. It looked less like erosion and more like the result of mechanical scraping that had occurred during sinking. This indicated that part of the ship had sheared internally, sliding past another section along this narrow path before locking into its final resting angle. Such evidence offered researchers a rare look into the mechanics of hull deformation at depths and pressures beyond typical testing environments. Simulations had never fully predicted this kind of movement. Now, real data from the wreck provided an anchor for future modeling. Continuing deeper, the drone entered one of the engine compartments. The machinery loomed like sleeping giants, coated in rust so thick it appeared to drip downward in frozen streams. But even here, amid collapse and decay, something stood out. Several gears remained meshed in perfect alignment. Their teeth, though corroded, showed minimal displacement. This suggested that the mechanical systems had remained intact longer than expected following the explosion. It hinted that the ship's power distribution network may have persisted for seconds or even longer after the torpedo strike. This revelation held profound implications for understanding the resilience of WOIT-era engineering under catastrophic conditions. It also reshaped theories about the ship's final attempts to maneuver or stabilize before sinking. Near the base of the engine room, the drone found a pocket of trapped air that had resisted collapse enough to leave behind a thin layer of metallic sheen along the walls. Chemical analysis would later be needed to understand its composition, but its existence alone was valuable. The preservation of such an environment meant the compartment behaved like a pressure buffer during descent. This meant that even after sustaining fatal damage, parts of the Juneau acted as independent pressure cells, influencing how different sections of the wreck interacted with the ocean's crushing forces. Understanding this process could influence future deep-sea exploration techniques, ensuring that probes and submersibles could better navigate unstable wrecks. Another unexpected detail emerged in the form of deep gouges on the floor plating. They ran parallel, extending several feet. At first glance, they resembled scrape marks left by shifting equipment, but their uniform depth suggested a different explanation. They indicated a moment of sudden, violent movement inside the ship as it broke apart, possibly from one of the engines tearing free from its mounts. Doing so would have unleashed immense force, dragging across the floor before the compartment decompressed fully. This sequence of events implied an internal collapse more intricate than previously documented, one that could refine the broader understanding of how large steel structures behave when subjected to explosive shock, followed by rapid flooding. The drone left the engine compartment and ascended through a void where a stairwell once connected levels of the ship. Only the railing remained in fragmented spirals. As the drone passed through, particles drifted upward, catching the lights and scattering them like underwater snow. The atmosphere inside the wreck felt strangely fragile, as though every movement risked disturbing stories preserved in layers of sediment. The next chamber housed equipment storage, though nearly everything had tumbled to one side. But among the clutter, one object remained upright, a toolbox still partially closed despite corrosion. The lid had warped, but not enough to break the hinge. Inside, through a crack, glints of steel reflected the drone's lights. Several tools had survived in recognizable form, suggesting that the compartment experienced uneven collapse, cushioning certain objects long enough for them to settle gently rather than being violently scattered. Each artifact revealed nuances of the ship's final minutes, and each structural deviation suggested new principles in naval architecture under duress. What researchers had once relied on, theory to interpret, now unfolded before them as tangible evidence. But the drone's most striking discovery awaited near the forward compartments, where the ship had suffered its most severe damage. As it approached that region, the water grew thicker with silt. The drone reduced its speed, sensors adjusting to avoid collision with protruding beams. Eventually, the space opened into a compartment that had no right to exist. According to all structural assessments, this area should have been obliterated. Instead, a partial cavity remained, impossible yet undeniable. Within it, the walls were bowed inward dramatically, forming a dome-like structure of bent metal. The appearance resembled the inside of a crushed sphere. The pattern of collapse did not match a simple implosion. It suggested simultaneous compression from multiple vectors. Such a phenomenon had rarely been observed in wartime wrecks. Inside this improbable compartment, the sediment was thick, obscuring much of the floor. But through the murk, the drone's light struck something extraordinary, a patch of flooring that was cleaner than the rest. The sediment there was far thinner, almost washed away. This suggested that water currents had entered and exited the space at unexpected angles, carving pathways. This hydraulic behavior indicated that as the ship descended, a temporary vortex formed within the collapsing hull, drawing sediment in and expelling it in rhythmic cycles. Such a discovery held significance not only for deep-sea geology, but also for future operations involving underwater vehicles. Predicting these microcurrents could prevent drone accidents in similarly unstable wrecks. The drone continued to explore the unnatural chamber until it found something that nearly caused the operators to halt the mission. Embedded in one of the inward bent walls was a fragment of metal that clearly originated from a completely different section of the ship. Its presence proved that pieces of the Juneau had collided internally during the breakup, becoming lodged in ways previously unimagined. This confirmed an internal collision theory rarely accepted by naval historians. It also suggested that certain deaths on the ship may not have resulted from external forces alone, but from rapid internal dislocations as the vessel tore itself apart. As the drone withdrew from the chamber, the team remained silent, absorbing the implications. Every image, every angle, every pattern told of a sinking far more complex than the classic narrative of instantaneous destruction. The Juneau had not simply detonated and vanished into the depths, It had resisted, warped, fractured, and twisted through a labyrinth of mechanical and hydrodynamic forces. It had died in motion, not in stillness. Moving one level higher, the drone entered perhaps the most iconic space of any warship, the bridge area. Little remained of its original shape, but enough structure survived to provide context. Here, the windows had imploded inward. The force patterns etched into the surfaces suggested a shock wave bouncing inside the compartment before dissipating. The angle of debris showed that parts of the bridge collapsed in sequence rather than together. This could revise theories about how command structures fail during catastrophic strikes. The drone settled briefly in front of what once held navigation instruments. Among the ruins, circular outlines of dials could still be made out, though their glass fronts were long shattered. One metal frame, however, had survived remarkably intact. It bore marks shaped by pressure, but still hinted at its original function. Instruments like this could offer insight into standard equipment used during that era. For naval historians, that alone was valuable. But its preservation also showed once again that microenvironments within the wreck behaved in unpredictable ways during collapse. The drone then entered a narrow passageway that led toward a cluster of smaller rooms. One of these had served as a communications space. Here, the walls still bore faint outlines where radios once hung. Wires dangled in tangled arrays, their insulation long dissolved. But amid the corroded remains, something remarkable persisted, a section of wiring that appeared less degraded than the rest. This anomaly suggested that the compartment had remained sealed just long enough to slow corrosion. It opened the possibility that chemical residue on those wires could contain traces of combustion or electrical activity moments before sinking. If so, it would enable a reconstruction of the ship's internal systems at the instant of explosion. The drone's ascent marked only a physical retreat. Mentally, no one in the control room had surfaced yet. Their attention clung to every frame of recorded footage, replaying segments in slow motion, isolating structural distortions and tiny anomalies that had been easy to miss during the live descent. What captivated them most was how the smallest details, nearly overlooked in the dim light, revealed enormous insights when examined patiently. The Juneau was no passive ruin. It was an active instructor shaping modern understanding of underwater destruction. Once the drone cleared the wreck and hovered in open water, its lights still faintly glowing in the surrounding blackness. A final sweep captured the full silhouette of the Juneau's remains spread across the seafloor. The wreckage field stretched farther than expected, and debris patterns radiated in angles that challenged assumptions about the ship's descent path. The dispersion suggested that the vessel, rather than falling as a single coherent mass, had rotated in several directions during its collapse. This rotation implied differing buoyancy pockets, trapped air shifting unpredictably, and sections of hull catching current-driven forces as they drifted downward. The ship's path to the seabed was not a simple downward plunge, but a spiraling, contorted fall, shaped by internal and external forces acting in tandem. Analyzing the debris field led to another powerful realization. Some components had settled at distances inconsistent with their original position on the vessel. This meant the breakup occurred in stages, not solely at the moment of the torpedo impact. The ship had continued tearing itself apart as it descended, stretching and warping under pressure until pieces sheared off and drifted separately. This helped explain why some fragments in the debris field appeared remarkably intact, while others were crushed beyond recognition. For researchers studying deep ocean wreck dynamics, this presented an unprecedented chance to refine models that had long struggled to account for the unpredictable choreography of sinking steel. Meanwhile, the drone's recorded sensor data provided an unexpected bonus. As it navigated through tight passages, subtle fluctuations in pressure and temperature revealed microclimates within the wreck. These pockets of distinct conditions were remnants of how water had moved through the ship at the time of sinking. Mapping these gradients allowed the team to reconstruct the sequence of flooding with remarkable precision. They could determine which compartments filled first, which resisted the longest, and how shifting volumes of trapped air affected the vessel's internal collapse mechanisms. This level of detail brought researchers closer than ever to understanding the moment-by-moment progression of a sinking that had once seemed instantaneous. The drone's footage of delicate artifacts, Surviving paper remnants, engraved metal, partially intact tools sparked intense interest as well. Each item carried not only historical weight, but also scientific potential. Their preservation suggested that certain environments within wrecks, particularly compartments sealed or shielded at just the right moment, could safeguard materials thought impossible to survive deep ocean conditions. This realization had immediate implications for the study of other wartime wrecks and ancient shipwrecks alike. Archaeologists and historians recognized the possibility that objects long presumed lost forever might still exist in pockets of preserved isolation within seemingly destroyed vessels. But it was not only the physical objects that generated excitement. The Juneau provided a rare window into how large structures behave when subjected to multiple catastrophic forces at once. Traditional engineering models assumed sequential impacts, explosion, flooding, collapse, yet the patterns inside the Juneau hinted at interactions occurring simultaneously, overlapping in ways engineers had not fully accounted for. A hull might deform in one direction, due to blast pressure even as internal compartments collapsed in another under the weight of inrushing water. These complex overlapping events created structural signatures that could now be observed and studied directly. Such insights held critical value for designing safer ships, submersibles, and offshore structures capable of withstanding unpredictable conditions. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the drone's shocking USS Juneau discovery? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.